beer or a shot of whiskey, I say to you, slancha. Linda has taught a number of courses for HASP. How many of you have taken a course from Linda before? Oh, you're in for a treat. She earned her BA from Hope College. She got her MA and PhD from the University of Chicago. And she wrote her dissertation on Frederick Douglass's image in books for children. She'll be offering a course in the summer about Douglass's daughter, Rosetta, who went to a white boarding school, and the outcome of that, which is really a very interesting topic. So you might want to sign up for that. She's taught English at various colleges, most recently at the University of Cincinnati Claremont College, and she retired in 2014. And she is here today to tell us all about Shakespeare sonnets. Linda.
Thank you.
Are you using this?
Let's see. I have it here. This is another one.
You can.
I'll take this one and you. Yeah. Okay. I am really happy to teach this class. It's the first time that I have offered a HASP class having to do with poetry. Something about poetry intimidates some people. And but we've talked as we came into the room to give our names and just mention kind of where did you first meet Shakespeare sonnets and what's going on. So we have Amy, Kathy, Barbara, Mimi, and Tina, and 2 newcomers to just say, when did you meet Shakespeare sonnets and where was the fear factor and how, so forth. Where are you? So, okay. Yeah. Okay.
My name is Jane. Sonnets. Oh, gee. Well, I'm sure we had.
That's why. Yeah.
I apologize, online people. Jane Handel and sonnets. I would say that it was college, maybe a little in high school. They are not the clearest things to me always. I don't always understand them 100%. I get the gist, but there's so many different kinds of sonnets. So Shakespeare, though, they're beautiful, kind of timeless. And so I thought, what fun to take a class.
Beauty and timeless, beautiful
Yeah,
and timeless.
Yeah.
So Jane.
I'm Joyce Elferding. I'm sure I first encountered Shakespeare long time ago, but I do remember that one time when I was teaching English composition, maybe a dozen years ago or so, one of my students actually brought me a book on Shakespeare, thinking that, I don't know if he thought I would get better grade, but at least he thought I would like it.
Great. Okay, so we'll have that available for questions or comments. All right, well, I did prepare I'm just very happy to do this with you. And I did prepare a PowerPoint. So we'll just go through this. What makes a sonnet more than its idea? Is its idea its meaning? And the answer is no. When all of us were in high school and college, one of the common sayings you might have heard teachers say is, it's not what does a poem mean, it's how does a poem mean. So, and in other words, let's take one of the sonnets we're going to read today, which is, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and so on that you read. And it comes around to saying, when I am in disgrace and down and out, I think of you and then I feel better. So let's say you get a letter from your loved one, and it just says at the end, he's not just this real articulate guy. So at the end, he says, when I get down in the dumps, I think about you and then I feel better. Are you going to feel like you received the love message of the century in that little saying? No, that's the idea of this sonnet. But how does this sonnet have its meaning? So that's kind of the idea of the idea. Let's see if I can make this work now. No, it's not advancing. Susan, this thing isn't advancing for me. Okay. There, okay. That works. Okay, now on your way out, turn out just a little bit of light. Thank you, Susan. Yeah. Okay, pop quiz. Let's pretend that you are back in high school and your teacher plans to test you on everything. So without looking it up, in what year was Shakespeare born? Your choices are 1512, 1562, 1662, 1762, and 1862. Sorry, Shakespeare is dead by 1862. B, everybody's saying B, that's right. Okay. By which languages was the English language of William Shakespeare's time influenced in grammar and vocabulary? Greek, Latin, Hebrew, French, Dutch, and German, mostly two of the above, all of the above, or mostly Anglo-Saxon. This gets a little more prickly. A and B? It's A and B? Oh, B, Latin. Uh-huh. Any other? What would be the argument for Hebrew? Well, we'll get back to that. What would be the argument for French? 1066 and all that. Yeah, the Norman conquest. So the French came in and really influenced the English after 1066. And so not mostly, and I personally would say, just to cut to the quick, I would say either all of the above or mostly Anglo-Saxon, because it never lost the Anglo-Saxon core that we are dealing with when we look at Old English and Middle English. Okay, when was the King James Version of the Bible printed? 1500 to 1550, and just to remind you, Luther did his thesis in 1517. 1600 to 1650, 1700 to 1750, later than 1750. You know what we mean by the King James Bible. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. With the first one, everybody quickly said B, 1562. With the second one, we had discussion about each one of these answers where people could see that, yeah, it's got to have a Latin base. And then at the same time, considering that the French came to England in the 11th century, it's got to be French. And then it's a Germanic language, so the German has to be in there along with Dutch, and most of two above and so forth. So we decided that it was all of the above, but the Anglo-Saxon base was never lost. So that was the complicated answer on that. Now we're looking at number 3, where we're trying to figure out when was the King James Version of the Bible printed.
I would guess A.
A, in the age of Luther. Any other feelings from this? And this is really just, it's B. All right. Everybody agree with that? 1600 to 1650. It was 1611. 1611. And it's interesting that Shakespeare's sonnets were first published in 1609. So it's no bloomin' wonder that the language of Shakespeare's sonnets sounds like the language of the King James Bible, because they were both within 20 years of each other when they were produced. Okay, what earlier poetry themes and forms led to Shakespeare's sonnets? Hebrew poetry of the Bible, poems rhymed in Latin, in Italy, in other words, English poems like Chaucer's. All 3 of the above. Everybody's going to say all 3 of the above are feeding into this stream of influence that comes upon William Shakespeare. and William Shakespeare. We're not going to get into his life because way too many people have tried to make every sonnet a little story from Shakespeare's life, and we need to throw that out of the window right now. The author stands as a speaker in the sonnets, and he can take any stance or love situation that he wishes. It doesn't mean that it means he himself. And it also doesn't mean that every poem is speaking from Shakespeare directly to you. We have a speaker and an addressee in many of these where it's like a little play that's being enacted. Each sonnet can be thought of almost like a play. This is Mary Oliver. And as we go through this, I am strongly recommending, but didn't require, and we're really not making this part of the class, but this is Mary Oliver's book, A Poetry Handbook, because if you want a really easy and good introduction to the different elements we're talking about, I highly recommend you pick up this book. And in class, I'm going to cover, just pass this around. In class, I'm going to cover little highlights from this book with each session that we have. It's not necessary to read it, but if you're keen on this, I recommend the book. Shakespeare for everyone. Well, we just had an anecdote from one of our class members, Barbara, was talking about her 4-year-old who wound up at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in the front row because a seat in the front row was cheaper than a babysitter. So she took her 4-year-old, and at the end of his seeing a play, she asked the 4-year-old what he thought. And the 4-year-old said,
It was really that the king was really mean to that old man. It was in Henry V.
the king was really mean to that old man because he was his friend. The kid got it. And another of our participants, well, that was Barbara too, was once challenged to present or explain Shakespeare to some engineering type scientific people who'd been assigned to read some Shakespeare. And their first question was, do you have a translation? And Barbara said,
It's written in English.
it's written in English. So the first step to reading any sonnet is to read it, and especially to read it aloud and to listen to it and not worry about a translation. Because when we hear something, we understand more than someone else might think that we do, because we all have this amazing command of the English language when we're as young as 4. And Shakespeare knows how to get there with what he's basically trying to do in the effect of even a big, long play. So sometimes Shakespeare gets spoon-fed to high school students in a way that's not as helpful as it really should be. Now, we all probably met iambic pentameter in high school, and we met iambic pentameter with awe and fear, and we're afraid that we couldn't pass a test on this and so forth. So that type of thing. And many people are afraid of anything written more than 20 years ago because they think that it's not contemporary, therefore not relevant to them. Well, Mary Oliver does a very nice job of explaining her point of view, which is the basic themes that stir people never go out of style. The basic human response to the language is timeless. Most of our country music or greeting card sentiments draw on some tropes, but it's not so rich. I mean, when we were in high school, one of the songs that was popular was you, there's no one like you can make my dreams come true if you say you love me too. Well, it's rhymed, but duh. So the themes are the same, but it's who's doing it. Greeting cards. Many people who want to express a sentiment to someone like happy birthday or I love you will go to the greeting card rack and look for something that has a message they feel captures their feeling in a greeting card because they feel they can't do it themselves. And so did you know that back in your days when you needed some extra cash, if you could land a greeting card, if you could get a greeting card company to accept your sentiment for a greeting card, what do you think they paid in those days? In those days, $600 to $1,000. to the person who sent in to send them in for a greeting card. So all of us Shakespeare folks should have been able to earn our pin money by doing greeting card work. Shakespeare is profound but hard to read, people think. And that's where the story of the 4-year-old comes in, because the 4-year-old doesn't have any of those barriers of I can't do this, or someone's going to test me, or it involves technical work, material that I can't do. So Mary Oliver's book is like a wonderful bridge to get over some of those things. I think that Shakespeare wrote sonnets for entertainment. And the entertainment was to stretch his powers of language. Now, since his sonnets, some of his sonnets were first published in 1609, he was born in 1562, as you all knew very well. So by 1600, he was 38. And so he's 47 when his sonnets first come out. So that's not, to me, that's not old. To none of us in this room is 47 old. But it's not young either. But he borrowed without shame, because he understood that all writing in English in poetry is borrowing enormously from all the sources that came down upon his language at that time. And he borrowed without shame, but he didn't borrow the words or the lines. He saw the things behind it that were being used, the manners and the ways that I would say tricks and tropes of other poets, from anything 300 years before him to like Hebrew poetry with all of its power as we find it in the Bible. So this again suggests that you can't just say, I love you at every meeting and parting and every morning or night. When you're in a real relationship, most people are looking for new ways to tell the other person how they feel. They're looking for that beautiful expression that will carry some extra power. So you try to use something that I would call the art concealing art, that has art behind it, but it also has a kind of natural beauty that's going to come through. And this is just making some points about the English language. The English language needed and gained by 1600 a repertoire through all these influences that were coming into it of French, Latin, Anglo-Saxon, Dutch, German, and everything. So that today, the English language has a larger vocabulary than many other languages do, by far. And that has to be partly because it rubbed elbows with so many other languages through trade and exploration, through diplomacy, through all of the presence of the English language throughout the world, rubbing elbows with other cultures and so forth. And also the tendency, I think, of English and American people to develop amazing new words all the time, from weekend to names of things and common sayings and common things. The English language inherited the courtly love poems and poses and customs of the Middle Ages, the lord and lady, the whole image of courtly love that you've probably read about. They also inherited a very rich language of religious love that comes partly from the Bible and partly from other traditions that we could call spiritual or religious. The King James Version of the Bible, printed in 1611, was not the first English Bible. There had been a previous English Bible. The Geneva Bible had been printed in Europe. And finally, the English king thought, here's what I think he thought. Why should somebody else get all the money from the publication of the Bible over there in Geneva? I'm going to create an English Bible. And he also knew that if he put the Bible into his English, there'd be certain words that could come into the Bible, kind of interpretations that could come into the Bible through his scholars, looking again at the Hebrew and Latin texts. One of the other purposes of the King James Bible was to get Latin out of the middle. The earlier Bibles sometimes had been translated from the Latin versions of the Middle Ages. So now it's got another gate to go through to get changed and modulated. And they wanted to go ad fontes to the original fountain for that it came from. So those scholars of King James did and had the ability to go back to the original or very early Hebrew for Old Testament and Greek for New Testament sources that they would use to get it right and to put it then into the common language of their day, which today sounds archaic to us, but it was just a fairly formal type of language of that day into which it would be coming. So greater scholarship by going to the sources, not tampering with anything, and introducing words that would have power. Footnote for today. The word predestination was first inserted into the Bible in Geneva, in the Geneva Bible of the 1500s. And predestination was already a hot word where certain people were accused of being all hung up on hell and damnation rather than the other message of salvation. So anyway, important concept, important word like predestination. Well, when you think about it, praedestinatio has got to be a Latin word. It couldn't have been absolutely original to the English language. It was borrowed from Latin, but it came into a Bible translation in Geneva when the Calvinists there decided that was the best word for the thing they were looking at. That was a footnote I didn't plan to put in, but anyway, maybe you got a kick out of that. But the English language by 1600 had inherited not only a Bible that richly and more correctly got to the original Hebrew and Greek sources of the language of the original languages of the Bible, but also a reading public. The printing press from movable type first appeared in Europe in about 1450. So now it was possible to cheaply produce many, many copies from movable type, not carving something into stone or something, or carving something into wood and so forth, all those old techniques. So that made possible a reading public. And gradually, as the Protestants in particular wanted everybody to be able to directly read the Bible for themselves, this was a very important influence on developing in England a reading public, which henceforth would have a tremendous familiarity and knowledge of the language and style of the Bible, the poetry in the Bible, and the stories in the Bible that would provide a tremendous cultural body of images and stories to which poetry could then refer, and in which poetry could borrow the language of religious love in many ways that we see in the poets after 1600. So songs and ditties and rhymes are also very important in feeding into the written love poetry of the later age. Fortunately, the English language is not inflected, does not show grammar by tacking on a stock ending, as you have in French or German. And that affects rhyme. How does that affect rhyme? If your ending has to show grammar, then your rhymes are going to be so boring because all you have to rhyme it with is that same old grammatical ending that tells you it's a direct object or something like that. And by being syntactical and not inflected, English gained a tremendous power to create poetry with much more interesting rhyme based on the word, not just a grammatical, technicality. Everybody in the English and American heritage, and I would have to add Dutch in there, loves humor, loves joking, loves satire, and loves to make fun of things. Would you all agree that maybe other cultures do too, but English and American love satire. They love to make fun of things. And for that reason, they love to have a free country because they want to be free to do that. I love you. I love you. I love you so much. If you break your leg, I'll be the crutch. They love crap like that. They love joking things like that are fun loving. And so we're going to see a fun loving element in Shakespeare sonnets. And the Bible contains a lot of poems, a lot of love poetry, and poetry itself. Many passages in the book of Job are really poetry. If only I had an advocate with the Father, if only someone could speak for me, says Job. The Psalms, of course, are 150 or more examples of poetry in lines. And the Hebrew way of rhyming is rhyming the meaning of the line. Say something and then say the same thing in different words. So that the line doesn't just rhyme at the end, but it's kind of a thought rhyme. And then one line builds on the other, so it has a necessary sequence. The Lord is, and it is in lines, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He leadeth me. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You could not rearrange those lines and get the same effect. They're in a necessary order that builds. And that is the idea of the thought progression and repetition that's coming along from Hebrew poetry, even though Hebrew poetry was not rhymed like an end rhyme of a word, but it was the antiphonal or double-voiced way that the lines unfolded. So by the time we get to 1450 with the printing press rolling along, and the Dutch press is, by the way, publishing more than half of the books published in Europe. Holland was unbelievably prolific, because if something was banned in England, it could always be printed in Holland and the Dutch printers would make a buck off of it. And that's literally true. After 1450, you had the Bible having been translated. Everything was imperfect, in a wonderful condition for the sonnet. So English sonnets are written in sentences, and sometimes this is ignored. It's missed that it's in sentences, but we have this amazing ability to hear in sentences, and the phrasing and the way something is read is in sentences. And Shakespeare very often did have grammatical sentences, not just dangling phrases and stray ideas coming along. So the people here present have already endorsed the idea that when you meet a sonnet, you just sit still, get comfortable, get ready to listen closely, forget what makes it work and even what word by word it means. First time through, just hear it and hear the tone. This is what Barbara was telling those engineering guys to just relax and listen. Listen to the beginning and the ending and think of who is speaking to whom. And I think this copy of the introductory page of Shakespeare's, look at the way they're spelling Shakespeare's sonnets, never before imprinted, at London by, and then some letters, to be sold by William Ashley, 1609. All right. Now iambic pentameter. I'm going to skip over the 4 feet. You'll meet them again in Mary Oliver. She'll explain that the different feet go iambic, comes from Greek. If you just say I am, that's an iambic foot. If you say I am 5 times, that's iambic pentameter. I am. That's it. We're done with that. And then we have trochee, which is the other way around. Trochee. If you say trochee, that is a trochaic foot. So if you want trochaic pentameter, it's da-da, 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 10 syllables said like that. Then we have 2 feet that have 2 different feet, like the unit that we're going to work with, that have 3 syllables. And the first one is anapest. So if you say It's anapest. Anapest, anapest, anapest. Think of 'twas the night before Christmas and all through the house. That's anapestic, whatever it is. Okay, that's the anapestic foot. And when you say 'twas the night before Christmas and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Now you don't read it that way, but under there is the anapestic foot that makes it sound fun-loving, teasing, childlike, etc. And for serious poetry, you don't want to lapse into anapestic foot because you're going to start to sound a little silly. And then dactyl. So D-A-C-T-Y-L. You say dactyl, 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 dac. Clackety, 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 clack. That's dactyl. So you have 2-syllable foot and 3-syllable foot, each one way around and the other way around, and you combine them, then you combine your feet into meter. So again, we have Greek words: monometer, dimeter, trimeter, tetrameter, pentameter, etc., hexameter, and then I forget septameter, and then octometer. All of those came down from Greek. They don't necessarily always fit the English language, but that's the metrical system. How many of you met that system in high school and you were expected to know something about it? Okay. All right. So it is worthwhile, but we can ditch it because I have developed Linda Walvard's no fuss, no muss model of iambic pentameter. Memorize this and you won't get lost in Greek and poetry and all those things about that. And you'll just be able to say, I think I'll have another piece of cake. That's a perfect iambic pentameter line. I think I'll have another piece of cake. So if you let that run in your mind and you're looking at a line of poetry and you want to know if it's iambic pentameter, just think, I think I'll have another piece of cake. And if it fits that, then you've got iambic pentameter. What do you think? Is that a good method or not? So I should patent that. Now, here's another pop quiz. Some of these lines are iambic pentameter and some are not. So immediately just say yes or no. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out. Now that is 10 syllables. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out. But is it iambic pentameter? Amy Hendrickson says no, it's not. The night before Christmas, all through the house. The night before Christmas, all through the house. You could kind of force it into it, but it's not iambic pentameter. It doesn't have the right sound. I could have told you this dumb thing was broke. Oh yeah, that's perfect iambic pentameter, isn't it? I could have told you this dumb thing was broke. Say you are sorry or I'm going home. No, that's got a triple foot to it. And you could go on and on with it. Say you are sorry or I'm going home to the arms of my mother who never will, blah, blah, blah. You could go on and on, but you're in trimeter. You're in a triple foot meter there. That's going to be tripping you up. Comfort of mother and, oh, there. Say you are sorry or I'm going home to the comfort of mother and maybe a poem. That's not iambic pentameter. Now, when I consider how my light is spent, is that iambic pentameter? When I consider how my light is spent, it is. But it's not like I think I'll have another piece of cake. It is varied and it's made more powerful by the variation. And when I consider how my light is spent is the first line of a beautiful sonnet by Milton about his blindness. And it ends with a line we've probably all heard before. They also serve who only stand and wait. So he's going to go through the pain of losing his sight and then find comfort in his last part of the sonnet. They also serve who only stand and wait, which is a very sad kind of resolution for Milton of his loss of sight. How about, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. No, that's not iambic pentameter. Now, we're also going to get into tone and intonation, and here's where the reading and the way it's read, or with the play, the way it's performed by the actors to bring out the feeling that depending on what you emphasize in English, you have different stories implied. I think I'll have another piece of cake. What story does that imply? If somebody says, I think I'll have another piece of cake. Somebody else had a piece of cake, and I think I'll have one too. I think I'll have another piece of cake. What story does that imply? I think I'll have another piece of cake. You had one before, you're going to have another one again. I think I'll have another piece of cake. You had a choice and you chose the cake, not the cookies and not the brownie. I think I'll have another piece of cake. The sort of the same thing, but you had a choice of desserts and you chose the piece of cake. As the speaker delivers it, tells you a different story, which is why listening to it read out loud by someone who's reading it with understanding is going to bring that meaning up, because even a 4-year-old can hear those differences in how it's said and what it means. The 4-year-old is definitely old enough to know the difference between when his mother says, sit down now, and when she says, sit down now. Completely different storyline here. And the 4-year-old reads the language that way. He knows that our language creates meaning through the tone and delivery. So English has the unfolding thing and the difference of tone, and says it in a way that emphasizes one word or another to create a context that will be clear in the unfolding. Now, we also have in our grammar, of course, both active and passive voice. The boy hit the ball and the ball hit the boy. In an inflected language, there would be an ending on boy and ball that would tell you which is the subject and which is the direct object. But when your language is syntactical, then it depends on word order to tell you what the function, grammatical function of the words are. There's a huge difference between the boy hit the ball and the ball hit the boy. In fact, hit means something completely different in that sentence. What about the boy was hit by the ball and the ball was hit by the boy? Same thing, but expressed in what we call passive voice, where the actual doer of the action is at the end of the sentence and the thing that was hit is in the beginning. Now, a lot of people who have done some editing have been told, don't use the passive voice, right? A lot of drafts that people create have a lot of passive voice in them, and a good editor will turn them around into active voice when they can. But let's take another look at this. If you come in crying from the street or crying to your best friend, and she says, what's wrong? And you say, a car hit my dog. You're not going to say it that way. You're going to say, my dog was hit by a car, because it's my dog that is making you cry, not the fact that it was hit by a car. So you turn it around because of emphasis and what the context is. My dog was hit by a car. You wouldn't say a car hit my dog. I mean, I think that's a simple example of the positive use of passive voice when you do need it. But in many languages, you would do that with endings instead of syntax. I think it's more powerful to do it with syntax. It gives the language, sorry, I'm promoting the English language here, I apologize, but I think the English language has very special powers. Also, the fact that a language can be inflected means it takes more space to write it. What is one reason that English is such a widely used international language? A lot of those engineers and scientists and business guys will say because of capitalism, because we're so capitalistic and we're so colonialized that our language just swallows up every other competing language. Another reason would be English is more efficient. Next time you buy a product that has directions in both Spanish and English, take a look at how much space each one takes to write out the directions. The Spanish version is longer in every case because it's inflected. And so it takes more space to convey it in Spanish. And that's true with many other languages as well, because ours is tighter and more tight. Compression is one of the key elements of a poem's power. So you have that characteristic. Now, we also have in the language of poetry, the problem or the question of what we could call poetic language. Mary Oliver is going to discuss this in more detail and talk to you about, in her book, talk about some of the mistakes that poets can make in using artificial phrases or corny phrases for something that sound kind of forced and they don't sound good. Just to get it down to the level of words, that Anglo-Saxon base should never be forgotten. If you say, I feel sick, sick is an Anglo-Saxon word. It's probably similar in Dutch and German. So Anglo-Saxon itself had German influence. So I feel sick, I sweat. But if you go to Latinate words, I perceived an ailment and I perspired. There you used Latinate words. Do you all understand what I mean? If you didn't study Latin, you could sort of catch this. My abdomen became inflamed and I expired. My belly was itchy, swollen, and red. I died. Belly, itchy, swollen, red, and died are all Anglo-Saxon words. So they're guttural, they're earthy, they're pithy. They just get right to the subject. And a lot of times our most down and dirty words are Anglo-Saxon, whatever that means, like dirt is Anglo-Saxon. And what would be a Latinate equivalent? Soil, I suppose. Territory is Latinate, and so forth. Earth, dirt, rump, storyteller, bug. Insect is Latinate and bug is Anglo-Saxon, and so forth. So sediment and narrator. So being aware of what kind of words, when we look at the sonnets, we will be looking at to what extent Shakespeare is using those Anglo-Saxon kind of based, pithy, earthy words. Now, which of these lines are the opening lines of an English sonnet? I don't think you have to have studied the sonnets in order to be able to listen to them and see which ones you think are the first lines of an English sonnet. And some of these are Shakespeare and some are not. When in Disgrace of Fortune in Men's Eyes is a poem we're going to look at in more detail today. So that's a Shakespearean. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. First line of a sonnet by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Much later time in the 1800s. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought. That is another Shakespeare opening line. When my love swears that she is made of truth. That's another poem we're going to look at today. That's a beginning of a Shakespeare sonnet. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. That's the opening of a gorgeous sonnet by Gerard Manley Hopkins. God's grandeur. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil, and so forth. It's got this intense, beautiful, but very guttural kind of lines. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. That is Shakespeare again, which we're going to look at in more detail today. When I have fears that I may cease to be. Does that sound like Shakespeare? Would you say maybe, maybe not? Hard to say. Let me not to the marriage of true minds is Shakespeare, one of Shakespeare's most famous sonnets that many people love. It sounds exactly like 2 Corinthians 13 definition of love, the Platonic definition of love in that sonnet. At the round earth's imagined corners blow. That is the first line of a famous sonnet by John Donne. At the round earth's imagined corners, blow your trumpets, angels, and arise, arise, you numberless infinities of souls, and to your scattered bodies go, and so forth. So it's an image of the second coming at this intense, dramatic beginning of a poem by John Donne. Bright star, would I were steadfast as thou art. This is John Keats. We're up to the Romantics now. This is the first line of a famous poem by John Keats. But it is a sonnet and it's still in the tradition of the love sonnets. So The sonnet is in iambic pentameter, but it's not like I think I'll have another piece of cake. If you were to write, when in disgrace of fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, I think I'll have another piece of cake. You just ruined your sonnet. Maybe you said sort of the same thing, but you wrecked the sonnet, that's for sure. Because that line that I gave you as your model is not good poetry. I mean, unless you're writing a silly poem or something. The line has forward motion. All of these have more drama in them than I think I'll have another piece of cake. They all lead forward. They say, what's next? It's like a first line that teases you right into the next line. What am I going to see next with any one of these first lines? And often the line will spill over, like at the round earth's imagined corners, blow. That's a directive. Blow your trumpets, angels. It just leads right forward. Now, in the sonnets, we often think that the sonnets are love poems and the lover is going to speak to the beloved in the sonnet. That's what we expect or think when somebody says Shakespeare's love sonnets. But when we get into them, you're going to find quite a bit of more variation in who is speaking to whom. And when we use the term the speaker, we mean the I in the poem. If there is an I in the poem, then that is referred to as the speaker. If there is a you or thee or thou in the poem, then that's the addressee, the person to whom the poem is said. And then, of course, we are always the reader out here looking at the speaker speak to the addressee. So it's like a little triangle where we're watching the speaker speak to the addressee. And maybe we're thinking, we're putting ourselves in the shoes of the speaker, we're putting ourselves in the shoes of the addressee, but we're watching it's a little triangle there. So whether we have love with a problem, of course, if a love story, if a love situation is boy meets girl, they fall in love, they get married, they live happily after all. You don't have a story. You just have a boring thing. Nothing bad ever happened. There's no problem. You know, the old saying, if you're writing a story and there's no conflict on page one, cut page one. So there needs to be an issue or a problem. So it has to be love and change, love and parting, love and time, love and death. There's some tension in the poem that causes a poem to come out of it. So if everything is fine, I mean, not that there aren't any sonnets of pure, beautiful love, just defining love, but it's more often that there's something that's a little story that's keeping the two lovers apart. This little poem is called A Lover's Quarrel. So we're going to be mindful of speaker, addressee, and the others in the poem. Now here, one line from Shakespeare is really, I think, many times he expresses the English ideal, or what you could call the 1 Corinthians 13 ideal. Love all alone, no season knows nor clime. Only love can supersede or overcome the seasons and the climate. Only love can endure beyond everything that could happen to it. And then in addition to that is Shakespeare's idea in some of the sonnets that a poem memorializing love has great power to let love survive time and change. So the poem itself becomes the agency by which love survives time and change. So here are two examples of what somebody out there trying to tell you what love means. When two hearts are meant for each other, no distance is too far, no time is too long, and no other love can break them apart. That's didactic. That's just straight didactic love values. It's kind of saying something, but it's not a poem, is it? It's just like a motto or something. And the other one, I finally understand what true love meant. I finally understood what true love meant. Love meant that you cared for another person's happiness more than your own, no matter how painful the choices you face may be, dear John. Again, it's didactic. It's reporting. It's just reporting something. It's not making something happen. It's not a poem. It's just a statement, a naive statement of love by an unknown author. So that was my introduction. Now let's take a look at the first poem that we're reading for today. And do I have a volunteer to read? Now let's see. I think we want to put this up on the screen, and I don't know if I can. Yeah. Yeah. I want to put the poem, I want to put the 3 poems up on the screen, and they're not, I didn't embed them in the PowerPoint. So we need to use one of the handouts to put it up on the screen. Do we have a quick way to do that? Okay. Let's take off. Yeah, that would be fine. And then for a minute, I'm going to, all right, here is When in Disgrace of Fortune. This will be the first one that we look at. Let me just, I'll go ahead and make a few comments from the Mary Oliver book while you set that up, and then we can have at least a half an hour to go through our 3 poems for today. The first theme that we're going to take from Mary Oliver and the first 34 pages of her book are concerned with the sounds of poetry. And she says that poetry is sounds, vowels and consonants, reminding you what is a vowel and what is a consonant. You probably have that in mind. And the sound devices that you've probably heard of before, like alliteration. Bumblebee is an alliteration. The first letter of the word is repeated, bumblebee, and little Lily Livingston is alliteration. Mary Oliver says that poems are the only real teachers of poets. Not a teacher, not a handbook, not a list of rules or habits or do's and don'ts in poetry. Put that aside. The only way to write well as a poet is entirely necessary to read widely and deeply. And that's just her theme throughout the book, which is one reason I like her. It's more important to read than to take a workshop, she says to students. And Mary Oliver has taught poetry to thousands of people. You all know who Mary Oliver is. She's a very beloved poet today who really understands traditional poetry and delivers to her readers poetry that has a contemporary sound but is fully an English poem. Time means very little in the world of poems, she says. Like, doesn't matter when a poem is read. You will get it. If it's well read, if it's well written, you will be able to get it. The subjects that stir the heart are not so many after all, and they do not change. So style and historical background are peripheral. And so she is setting aside the tendency to study poems for style, to really focus on the style. She's certainly setting aside any idea that in order to understand the poems, you have to study Shakespeare's life. Forget it. You can study Shakespeare's life, but just trying to decide what situation in his life, who is the dark lady? You know, many of the sonnets have an imaginary mistress. And so much ink was poured into the question, who is the dark lady? Meaningless, says Mary Oliver. Don't worry about that. But metrics are important. Compression, the 3 elements that you'll hear in a good poem are formality, compression, and originality and imagination. So now let's look at the first one and just read it. Does anybody want to read it for me?
when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and troubled deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy, least contented least, sorry. Yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sing hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings.
Great, thank you. So, in terms of the sounds, what do we hear in this? Just the sounds of this. What makes this kind of come across? Let's just focus on the first line, because the first line is always the first card laid on the table. It's like the opening couple pages of a novel. The first card's laid down. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. How is that different from when out of luck and with no respect? Like nobody respects me and I'm out of luck. Why is when in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes more powerful? I all alone beweep my outcast state. Yep. Okay. Beweep. Now we know the word bemoan is sort of old fashioned, but we hear that. But I haven't heard beweep anywhere except like this is reaching back to probably an earlier word. I beweep. What is the difference between weep and moan? I beweep. Well, it's more Anglo-Saxon. It's got that W and P in there that makes it more punctuated or something. I beweep my outcast state. How is the speaker looking at himself in this line? In these first two lines, is the speaker in the frame of mind right now where he's just feeling like his fortunes are zero, his stature with other people is zero, and I beweep my outcast state. It's like he's at an extreme point here of nothing is going right. And troubled deaf heaven with my bootless cries. Well, bootless is what? Hopeless. My hopeless cries. You do something and you do something else to boot. It's not going to do you any good. Your hopeless cries. Why should he say in line 3 that heaven is deaf to his pleas? Why should he say his cries are hopeless? And what is he actually complaining about in these complaining lines? Troubled deaf heaven with my bootless cries. Well, heaven isn't going to listen to me, and my cries are just bootless, and I'm all alone. And look upon myself and curse my fate. Look at how many Anglo-Saxon words. Well, fortune and eyes, beweep for sure, outcast, and deaf heaven, and bootless, Anglo-Saxon, and look, not examine or meditate, look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope. If your son or daughter came to you with these complaints and said, oh, Mom, I have no friends. I'm just out of luck. I tried to write this book and nobody wanted it. People are richer than me. somebody looks better than I do, somebody has more friends than I do. This kind of sounds kind of high schoolish, doesn't it? And you say, honey, get a grip, don't you? You're not going to indulge your child in this kind of overly, I mean, you're sympathetic, but you're not on board with these particular sorrows. Because you know them. Yeah, you know them. And it's not even as significant as my dog died. You know, it's not that significant. You, as the mother, are trying to teach your children that friends don't mean everything. You never measure your worth in your friends, and that you should be more concerned with the big picture and not about something that will happen today. You're going to come up with all these truisms and things to tell the person who's experiencing all this. Yes, you should be walking beside them in their sorrows, but there's a limit to that. And so the first 8 lines of the poem are almost self-examining in a way. They're looking forward to where the turn is going to be. Now, Mary Oliver is going to say a sonnet always has a turn. And where is the turn? So let's look at the grammar to see that. When, now I'm going to read it very fast to sort of highlight the grammar. When, in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me more like to one rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet, there's the turn. So the turn comes along in line 9. We have 8 lines of beweeping. Yet, in these thoughts, myself almost despising. Line 9 has come down to the bottom of the pit. I mean, these are so much my burden that I almost hate myself at this point. And that low point creates a turn where I say, yet, wait a minute. In these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply, I think on thee. Now, does it mean happily, meaning happily, or luckily I chance to think on you? Haply, I think on thee. I think on thee, not you cross my mind, but I think on thee. And then my state, and then a parenthetical, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns, my state, or my soul, sings hymns at heaven's gate. Again, an extravagant, not just I feel better, but I'm singing hymns at heaven's gate. I'm back to heaven, and heaven was deaf before when I was moaning and groaning and beweeping. Now I'm singing praise at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered, such wealth brings. But then I scorn to change my state with kings. Now, does this sound like, let me throw out a few ideas and see if you think these ideas fit the poem. What if you said, well, I think this is a widow and her husband has died because she remembers him. She remembers his love. Thy sweet love remembered. It's not, she's remembering it in the past. Such wealth brings. But then I feel like I wouldn't exchange my life for a king's. Again, it's extravagant. It was an extravagance of sorrow followed by an extravagance of recovery. But is this a widow sonnet? No, there's not enough here to support that. It's like sometimes people think a poem means whatever you think it means. And that can be partly true, don't you think? That it can be partly true, but the language inside, it has to fit with the whole poem the way it fits together. If you kind of took a sidetrack and said, well, I think this is a widow, remembering the love, my love, reckoning with it again to kind of realize, step back and take another look at what's good. Just like your child came home with 50 woes today, lost his lunch and he had an argument in the playground and he flunked the test and his teacher scolded him and he had to stay after school. And you're going to say, well, didn't anything good happen today? Like, let's just put that away and think about something good that happened today to help your child stop concentrating always on what happens that gets them down. Teach them the habits of pulling themselves out of something. How well do you like this sonnet? How many of you think that this is a great sonnet to start with? I really, really like the way it unfolds. It's got this beautiful unfolding to it. And among the different sonnets that we're going to meet, this is one that rings my chimes, let's say. Let's take a look at this one. This is one of the most commonly studied poems in college classes where people meet Shakespeare sonnets. And while I like this sonnet, it's just one of Shakespeare's many tricks in his bag. But this sonnet starts in with negatives. And many, many sonnets are going to play with no and double no, and anything having to do with a lack or a no or a nothing. You're going to see that playing with negative expressions. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are done. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes, there's more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, so here's the turn. By heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied by false compare. So he hates false comparisons, and this is in a way playing off of, the old, maybe the courtly love tradition where her eyes are like the sun, her cheeks are like roses, her lips are like cherries, and you move on down and we get as far as the breast here, but some of those poems go a good deal farther down the line. And so this is going to make a kind of playful reference to all those poems of yesteryear that sang the beauteous love praises, in kind of a going hair, the hair, the eyes, the cheeks, the lips, and so forth, and praising the mistress' physical beauty. And this poem, so where is the break in this poem? And yet, by heaven, I think we get the break in the couplet in this particular case. Many times you're going to see Shakespeare give you 12 lines of a developed thing and then turn it in the couplet. And the turn comes in the couplet. But we just saw one that was broken 8 and 6. And that the 8 and 6 is generally called the Petrarchan or the Italian model, where very, very often Petrarch, this great Italian romantic poet, is going to do a thing, do a setup in his 8 lines, and then the so what in the 6 lines of the last poem. But Shakespeare likes that pithy turn at the end that gets power into those final 2 lines to turn the sonnet. Now, how will, between these two, let's look again at the number of Anglo-Saxon words in here. Red. Red is a pithy word. Snow, white, not alabaster. Her breasts are done. That's got a kind of, it's got an air of comedy to it. It really does. Like, how would you know, and if hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. That's kind of a laugh line almost. And I've seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. So by the time we get to these lines, we expect every line to be a poetic ideal, and then no, that's not here. And the more times you repeat that with a new variation, the more developed and fun the whole idea gets. So you yourself could take the structure of this and write a poem about your child. And use these cherubic images and then just kind of undercut it in the line. Do it over and over and over again. But my child is like no other, and my child is just the rarest and the best of all. You could do a poem that was imitating Shakespeare without taking a single actual word out of this line. You would be imitating the way that it's structured, and that is all what the really artistic type of plagiarism is all about. Yes, it's a little fakey. I really, in a way, I understand that your English professors, the Shakespeare professors who have to, try to go the distance and get the average undergraduate interested in a Shakespeare poem can pull this one out. It's like taking Marvell's poem To His Coy Mistress, which is even more sexy than this one, and will get them all involved in looking at Renaissance poetry and its freedoms. But I don't think it's one of Shakespeare's very best sonnets. It's just another one of Shakespeare's playful sonnets that does what it does very well. Now, I think we don't need to go into the rhyme scheme, because I think back in high school or wherever you understood that the last lines are sun red dun head, that's a quatrain. And then white cheeks and delight reeks, that's the second quatrain, meaning a set of 4 lines rhyme that way. And then no sound go ground is the third quatrain. And then you have a couplet, a rhymed couplet with rare and compare at the end. Okay. Now here is another theme that you're going to see a lot of poems play with: truth and falsehood, true and fair, and play with this poetic idea. Now, let's go back to this one a second, though. Who is speaking in the previous poem? None of these 3 poems are the lover speaking to the beloved. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. Oh, excuse me. No, I'm sorry. Yet I think on thee. I'm sorry, that was wrong. It's the speaker saying, when I'm all down and out. Then I think of thee. I think on thee. And then everything changes. So it is the speaker speaking to the beloved. This one has no you in it. It's just a winking poem where he refers to his mistress, but he's speaking to. The address is really anyone of his time. So it's a rhetorical poem, and it's a dramatic poem in that way. Now, and this one again is going to refer to the mistress, but it's kind of a joking poem talking about his mistress. There's an I, a speaker in the poem. When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. Okay, now, when we get through those first 2 lines, we get what Shakespeare is going to be doing here. It's going to go, I know that she knows that I know that she knows that not all of this is 100% true. So we play a game with each other that I know that she knows that I exaggerate some things and omit some other things. And so does she. And that's why we're so happy together. Is that sort of how you would sum up the defense of lying in this poem? And it is playful. And I do believe her, though I know she lies, that she might think me some untutored youth. Now, take that third line. Is it saying, I do believe her, though I know she lies? That, in other words, in order that I believe her so that she will think me some untutored youth, which I am not. In other words, he's not an untutored youth. He is learned in the world's false subtleties of logic. And so that she might think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's false subtleties, like logical non sequiturs. Thus, vainly thinking that she thinks me young. So I think that she thinks that I think I'm young. We're down to the 3rd level now. Although she knows my days are past the best, simply I credit her false speaking tongue. On both sides, thus is simple truth suppressed. Now, does the poem turn there? where the last 6 lines in this time are going to be but, and then question what he just said. Like we have this little deal going where I compliment her and she pretends that she thinks I'm young and I pretend that I think she still looks like she did when she was 16. And when my love swears that she had on both sides, but wherefore says she not she is unjust, and wherefore say not I that I am old. So this is going to be the truth here. And wherefore, oh, loves, and so this is asking a question. Why does she, wherefore says she not? Why does she not say she is unjust? That's about a triple negative there. And wherefore say not I that I am old? And then he answers that question. Oh, love's best habit is in seeming trust. That looks like a quotable line. Love's best habit is in seeming trust. Like you and your husband are going out to a really important dinner and you bought a special dress for this occasion. Maybe all his business associates are going to be there and you're going to be trying to really look good. And this dress was a mistake. You bought this dress and it really doesn't look very good on you. But you try it on and it's time to go and you come down and you say, honey, how do I look? What's he going to say? If he doesn't say you look wonderful, he should be put in the penalty box for quite a long time because you need the self-confidence of him saying you look great. Or what if he said, well, I don't like the dress, but you are wonderful to me. Or I don't like the dress, but you'll overcome it because you're so beautiful, or something like that. He could say something like that that was a little bit more truthful. Love's best habit, double word of habit. What does a habit mean besides learned behavior or chosen behavior? The none in her habit. Yeah, and you inhabit. Love's best, well, the nun's habit. Love's best clothing. In other words, love's best disguise, love's best habit is in seeming trust. Is there such a thing as seeming trust? Well, do you trust the other person or not? Or is there value in having a habit of seeming trust as your modus operandi in your love relationship? And you don't automatically mistrust someone just as a habit because you're going downhill if you start out with that. And with that attitude, and age in loves not to have years told. So I don't like having somebody remind me of my years. Therefore, and then we're going to end with a joke. And lie here means tell a falsehood, but it also means lie down, as lie with someone is used all the way back in Hebrew scripture to mean sex. So therefore I lie with her and she with me. And in our faults, by lies, we flattered be. So I like this one a lot better than My Mistress' Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, because it's more complicated. It's more fun loving in a way. And it really explores a truth in love about when is the right time to not tell. You know, the Bible says, speak the truth with love. Tell someone with the truth, but modify it with the way you say it so that it's not painful. And that, you know, that kind of value that you know how to speak the truth. Okay, so then you also got this little handout, which comes from the Poetry Foundation. I am very fond of the Poetry Foundation and their site. So since I didn't, you all have your own copies of the sonnets, and that's great because we saw some beautiful editions here. If you prefer to see the sonnets online or you want to augment what you're doing with stuff that's online, try the Poetry Foundation site, because not only are these printouts coming out in the very nice printing that you see, but they also have information about each sonnet. If you really would like to see a paraphrase of the sonnet to get the idea of it more quickly, that's on there and you can go from the first line. I love it that all the sonnets have numbers and they're also identified by their first line, so we can easily refer to them without worrying about what edition someone is looking at. Another site that I'd like to recommend as you go ahead now to read some more sonnets is a site called No Sweat Shakespeare, obviously aimed at that old undergraduate who wants the most easy and quick dimension. But No Sweat Shakespeare gives you a correct version of the sonnet itself, followed by a paraphrase, and then followed also by your opportunity to click on the next little thing, and a really genuine, full bore English, British Shakespeare professor will read the sonnet to you very well. So you can hear it read by Sir somebody, or Sir this, or Sir that, and hear this British delivery of the sonnet very well read. So that's really nice too, because every time you separate the sonnet from its sound, you're looking at the wrong thing. You kind of cut its arms off or something. And so the No Sweat Shakespeare will help you find sonnets that you like. So for next time, we have 5 minutes left, but I'd like to hear comments from you on anything that you saw or heard today. Our plan for next time is to choose about 5 to 7 sonnets that will be the next ones that we really look at closely. And here's my suggestion. I can tell you which sonnets I think are really precious gems, and we can use those. Or you, in the next day or two, can skim through these sonnets. You all have either a copy of the sonnets at hand, and you can just skim through them and see which ones you would like to spend some time on in class. And I'd like everybody also to choose a loser. I want you to go through the sonnets and pick one that you think, hey, this is like, he should have put this in the wastebasket. And one of the poets I love, Liesl Mueller, would say, the wastebasket is my master. No matter how accomplished a writer is, they're always still throwing stuff away that's just not worth working on anymore. So pick one that to you is a loser, and be ready to kind of tell us which one it is. I think I can access that site online, pull it up, and we can all see it. And then we can talk about the loser and see if we can make something out of it. And you could also maybe pick one that is the most difficult to make anything out of it, any sonnet you've ever seen. That could be your loser. But so sometimes looking at something Shakespeare did that to you isn't one of his best. Are there specific sonnets that you have in mind right now that you want to make sure we talk about in class? One of my friends, Judy Parr, who you probably all know, said that her favorite sonnet is "That time of year thou dost in me behold." That time of year thou dost in me behold. So just because it's a favorite of mine too, we will include that one. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past. That's a sonnet that we might include. But if you have other nominations right now or in the next day or two, send me an email. Tell me which one intrigues you and you'd like to put it on the menu of sonnets we'll discuss together and see what everybody's ideas are. Okay.
There weren't any chat questions.
Okay.
So I think we're all set, and you stayed right with your time limit.
Yes, I was kind of watching
Good job.
that. So we promised next time to study 5 or 6 poems next time that will be from a selected group of 12 or 15. And I'd like to get those ideas from you. So if you send me a couple ideas of your favorites.
Okay, thank you, Linda. And we'll see you all next week. Same time, same place.